Good evening, everyone. My name is S.D. Sri Revati, Assistant Professor of English. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone in this weekend literary talk program. For this week, we are going to discuss the introduction of literary criticism and Aristotle the Poetics. First of all, we have to know what is literary criticism. Literary criticism is the intermediary between the author and the reader. Criticism explains the one to the another. According to Thomas Carlyle, criticism stands between the inspired and the uninspired. Therefore, critic explains the full meaning of work to those who might not grasp the meaning. Then we have to know who is called as critic. See, critic is a person who judges, evaluates or analyzes the literary or artistic works. It may end up with favorable or unfavorable opinions. Then, how do we get the word criticism? Criticism is a passing judgment. Literature is an art, whereas criticism is a science. At whole, literary criticism is an art which is scientifically analyzed. The next to remember is functions of literary criticism. They are defining, classifying, expounding, and evaluating. The next is we have to know some relation between criticism and literature. Criticism derives its existence from literature, whereas literature derives its existence from life. In simple, literature is the reflection of life, whereas criticism is the reflection of literature. Then we have to remember certain points to be qualified as a good critic. A critic must be a master of his craft. A critic should also have a natural aptitude for it. He could be firm in his standards and to be responsive to new impressions. A critic must be sensitive, penetrating, and wise also. He must be free from all the bias. A good critic should also have a knowledge of literature and technical informations. He must have powerful expressions and also good languages. Then we have to know some basic types of literary criticism. There are four basic types of literary criticism. The first is text-oriented criticism and author-oriented criticism, context-oriented criticism, then reader-oriented criticism. The first, text-oriented criticism relies only on the study of text. For example, it deals with philology, philosophy, rhetorical, formalistic, and new criticism. And the next is author-oriented criticism. This kind of criticism depends on biographical view of author, psychoanalytical theory, and phenomenology. And the third is context-oriented criticism. This context-oriented criticism, it relies only on the content. It explains what the content is about. Some text is meant for exclusively on Marxism, feminism, new historicism, postcolonialism, black feminism, etc. And the fourth one is reader-oriented criticism. This is based on reader alone. It depends on how the reader grasps the meaning of text, right? For example, we have reader response criticism. The next is there are three formal types of criticism. See, this is more important. Three formal types of criticism. The first one is classical criticism. Classical criticism is also called as legislative or traditional criticism. And the second is romantic criticism. Again, romantic criticism also called as liberal or aesthetic criticism. And the third one is appreciative criticism. Once again, I am coming back. This classical criticism have some features, right? This classical criticism was also called as the first class criticism. This was the criticism of the past. They follow certain rules and regulations up to Renaissance. Example, Aristotle, T.S. Eliot, Matthew Arnold. And this classical criticism was entirely based on objective. Again, this classical criticism was divided into three types. They are ancient classical critic, neoclassical critic, and modern classical critic. Who is called as ancient classical critic here? See, are critics of ancient Greeks and Roman writers, right? For example, in Greek literature, we have Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Alexander. In Latin writers, we have Horace and Longinus. For English, we have Sir Philip Sidney. Then next come to neoclassical critic. Again, neoclassical critic were the critics of 17th and 18th century. See, neoclassical critics are also called as new or pseudo-classical critic. For example, we have John Dryden, Boileau, Alexander Pope, and Dr. Johnson. And the third one is modern classical critic. Modern classical critic in this sense, Matthew Arnold for 19th century and T.S. Eliot for 20th century. Why we call these critic as classical critic? See, why? Because they follow certain rules through in their criticism, right? Then next, romantic criticism. The real meaning for romantic in this sense, which is new or something strange to us, right? This romantic criticism records their author's own impression and it differs from person to person. Rousseau was called as the father of romanticism. Later, this romantic criticism was followed by Wordsworth, Byron, Keats, and Shelley. This romantic criticism was entirely based on subjective point of view. And the last one is appreciative criticism. Here, writer as a god, critic as a priest, and reader as a devotee. For example, I am saying, through the priest, we came to know many untold moral stories of God and goddesses. It must bring some good knowledge to us, good spirit to us, right? Likewise, by the writing of critic, the readers are capable to understand many texts and they appreciated it. So this type of criticism is called as appreciative criticism. Before going to the biographical information of Aristotle, we have to know who is Aristotle here. See, Aristotle was the student of Plato and the master of Alexander the Great. I am adding one more information here. Socrates was the master of Plato, Plato was the master of Aristotle, and Aristotle was the master of Alexander the Great. Aristotle is an absolute monarch to poets and critics. He was lived between 384 to 322 BC. John Dryden called him the father of criticism. T.S. Eliot called him as a perfect critic. Aristotle was also a father of European civilization. He was the first writer to expound principles of art based on aesthetics, and he was also the first man in the history of literary criticism to offer certain principles of literature. Aristotle was also a theoretical critic. Though Plato was the master of Aristotle, there are many differences between them. Plato has a metaphysical mind, Aristotle has a scientific mind. Plato was the man of transcendental and idealist, whereas Aristotle was realist and experimentalist. Plato is mathematical and abstract, whereas Aristotle is scientific and concrete. Plato banned poetry from his ideal republic. He supported only two forms of poetry, hymns to God and panegyric form of poems. Then Aristotle approached literature as literature. He refuted Plato on many grounds. According to Aristotle, the first aim of poetry is to please and delight. It may instruct in the process of delightment and to give comfort to the readers. Let's see some biographical information of Aristotle. Aristotle was born on 384 BC at Stagira in Greece. His father, Nicomachus, was a court physician to the king. Aristotle was interested in biology and physical science. At the age of 17, he was admitted to Plato's academy. Aristotle stayed there for 20 years till Plato's death. In the age of 37, he returns to Assos, a village in Cephalonia, Greece. He married to a lady called Phaedrias, and he became the teacher of king's son named as Alexander or Sikandar a Great for 7 years. After the death of his father, King Philip, Alexander became a king. Aristotle returns Athens and started his own school called Lyceum. He died in 322 BC. His books were translated into Arabic first. The important features of Aristotle are he gave a lecture on so many topics like logic, philosophies, metaphysics, ethics, physics, zoology, rhetoric, etc. He was a theorist and showed his interest in theory. He spoke on rhetoric but not an orator. He spoke on medicine but not a doctor. This shows that Aristotle was a man of versatile. For students of literature, two of Aristotle's works are important, the Rhetoric and the Poetic. Rhetoric means the art of speaking, whereas Poetic means the art of poem. The Poetics, it was originally written in Greek language. See, Greek literature was rich during the 4th century BC. Aristotle's The Poetics is a fragmentary work of literary criticism which was never meant to be published. Probably one of his scholars might have written it. It is available in the form of rough sketch. Definitely some sections have been lost. Aristotle's The Poetic was considered as a law book for tragedy. Later, it was published in England in the year of 1536. In Greek version, it was published by Trincavelli. In Latin, it was translated by Passy. It was Robert Shelley who created as the English text in the year 1548. Abercrombie calls Aristotle's The Poetics as a counterblast to Plato's theory of poetry. After writing the Rhetoric and Poetics, people call Aristotle as a lawgiver, a judicial critic, a theoretical critic, and legislative critic. Let's come to Aristotle's The Poetics. This Poetics deals with tragedy, epic poetry, comedy, and history. It has 26 chapters. These 26 chapters once again deals with tragedy, epic poetry, comedy, and history. According to Aristotle, chapter 1 to 5 deals with epic poetry and chapter 6 to 19 it exclusively dedicated to tragedy. See, according to Aristotle, tragedy is the only truth of life. He gave importance to tragedy alone. Then 20 to 22 deals with poetic dictions of tragedy, and 23 to 25 deals with comparison, and 26 gives the superiority of tragedy is re-established. Then, according to Aristotle, tragedy is an imitation of action that is serious, complete, and of certain magnitude through pity and fear, affecting the proper purgation of these emotions. There are 6 elements in tragedy. According to Aristotle, there are 6 main elements in tragedy. The first is plot. Plot, character, thought, diction, melody, spectacle. Once again I am repeating: plot, character, thought, diction, melody, spectacle. The first, plot, character, and thought are external devices, and diction, melody, spectacle are internal devices. First of all, we have to see what is plot. Here, according to Aristotle, plot is called as the soul of tragedy. Again repeating, according to Aristotle, plot is called as the soul of tragedy, and there can be no tragedy is possible without a plot. And plot is technically the first and important constituent of tragedy more than characters. A plot must have certain magnitude. It can be studied in 3 senses. The first is magnitude in length, and the second is size, third is order and proportion. Here, magnitude involves that the plot must have logical order and symmetry. A plot should not have many episodes and cantos. A plot should be fantastic but not fortunate. There are 2 types of plot. The first is simple plot and the second is complex plot. In simple plot, we have flat characters. Again, in complex plot, we have round characters. This term, flat characters and round characters, was coined by E.M. Foster in his Seven Aspects of Novel. Once again, I am repeating, the term flat characters and round characters was coined by E.M. Foster in his Seven Aspects of Novel. Here, what is called a simple plot? Here, a simple plot is having actions which moves forward uniformly without having any sudden changes, right? It does not have any sudden changes and any ups and downs, any twist and turning in that plot, right? In simple plot, we have flat characters. Here, a flat characters or characters who assigned a one particular role and they are doing the same role from the beginning to the end, whether it is a good character or bad character, but they did not change their attitude. They are constant from the beginning to the end of the plot, right? For example, we have Claudius in Hamlet and Cordelia in King Lear. Next, come to complex plot. In complex plot, there are certain other elements employed in this plot. The first is hamartia. Hamartia means tragic flaw. See, this word tragic flaw was coined by A.C. Bradley. A.C. Bradley. Again, hamartia means an error of judgment. Here, error of judgment means an ordinary mistake committed by the hero and it brings some fall to them, right? It brings about the fall of the hero. So, it is also capable of bringing out catharsis of emotion to the audience. For example, we have Othello. Othello was over possessive to his lady love Desdemona. So it is called as hamartia. He falls from the hero character. He was over possessive to his lady love Desdemona. So it is an ordinary mistake. Next we have peripecia. Here, peripecia means reversal of fortune. Reversal of fortune in the sense from good to bad means you are doing something good and unexpectedly it turns to bad. So this is called as peripecia. Means you are doing something good and the condition is all of a sudden it turns to bad, from good to bad or from bad to good. For example, we have Hamlet, Othello and King Lear. Next come to anagnorisis. Anagnorisis means realization or recognition of truth, right? For example, we have Oedipus, which was written by Sophocles. Here, Oedipus' kingdom is facing a great famine and he calls the fortune tellers to find out who is the reason for this famine here. See, here Tiresias is a fortune teller in Oedipus and he comes and tells him that the king himself was the reason for this curse. See, just listen it. King himself, that Oedipus himself was the reason for this curse to his kingdom. So when the king recognized the truth, see, this is a journey from ignorance to knowledge when the king came to know the truth. So this part is called anagnorisis. In Shakespeare, we have examples like Hamlet and Othello, right? Next, character. See, in this character, according to Aristotle, there are 4 points should be taken care while writing characters in a tragedy. The first is character must be good. Then character must be appropriate. Characters have likeness in the sense they must be lifelike, right? They must have some consistency. Tragedy must have limited characters. A tragic hero is the only important character. A tragic hero must be neither perfectly good nor utterly bad. An aptness of the character is more important. That is, character should match the standard of that particular role. Next, thought. Thought is nothing but a theme of tragedy. It should be dependent on great thought. Great thought in the sense it was universal thing which is applied to everyone. It is common in everyone's life. Every life it should be common. There are two types of speech. The first is which is expressive of author's moral purpose, and the second is which is argumentative. Then the fourth is diction. See, that ancient classical critics, they follow one theory in diction. See, diction is nothing but a collection of words, right? That ancient classical critics, they follow they follow a theory which is called as collect select arrangement theory. Once again I am repeating, collect select arrangement theory. First of all, they collect all the words, right? They collect all the words and they select from the collection of words. They select from the collection of words and they arrange the words in order. Just listen, they arrange the word in order after the selection of words. See, in this diction, the words should match that particular periods. Aristotle talks about grammar and linguistics. So, according to him, language should be lucid without being common. And the next title is melody. Melody is nothing but a minor element. It is also a song. A song or melody is an adornment rather than essential. In simple, it is adding beauty to the beauty. Right? It is a minor element. The melody to be brought out by performers' art. These songs are seen in choral sections. This melody should be suitable. Suitable meter should be used in melody. The full effect of melody will be seen in performance. The last topic is spectacle. See, the spectacle is nothing but as spectators. The way the spectators or the only persons motivated the plots, right? The way the drastic text is to be produced and the drama has to be presented to the audience. From this point, I could end up this section. Thank you for your listening. Thank you all.